Good afternoon, everyone. I am Susanna Alote. I'm a second year political science student and student ambassador at the University of Amsterdam. I will be one of your hosts for this event, and I hope you're just as excited as I am to listen and to learn about what our panelists have prepared for us today. We will hear from our co-host in a bit, but I would like to first welcome you all to this Gaybourhoods event, part of the University of Birmingham and University of Amsterdam Student Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador Partnership EDI Festival. This partnership between the two universities was formed in 2019 to focus on two areas: equality, diversity, and inclusion, hence EDI, and medical training and research. EDI is an issue that is of the highest importance to both universities located in highly diverse cities. Working together enables academics, students, and staff across the universities to research, teach, and promote EDI.
Hi everyone, I'm Terry Peters and I'm a second year master's student in the track of persuasive communication, and I will be your second co-host for today. And I'm also a student ambassador for the University of Amsterdam. And I'm honored to welcome you today to the second out of 4 events that together form the online EDI Festival for this year. A link to the events page will be posted in the chat. So therefore, if you feel inspired after this session, do feel free to sign up to one of the coming events as well. And during these coming events, topics such as visualizing diversity in the city and embedding EDI in practice will be discussed. So for today, we'll listen to 2 presentations, we'll watch a short film, and we'll finish with a Q&A session. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them to us. You can post the questions in the Q&A box that you can find online. And we'll pose your questions anonymously to the panelists after the discussion. So Leslie, in terms of housekeeping, this session will be recorded, but only the panelists will be visible. And also a live transcript should be visible on your screen. And something else that is good to note is that the chat function is turned off right now. So if you have any questions, do feel free to ask them, but post them in the Q&A box, please.
Okay, we are lucky to be joined by a panel of 2 expert speakers as we explore the meanings, the importance, and the future of LGBTQ+ spaces and venues in face of factors such as urban redevelopment, growing inequality, and the recent challenges brought by the pandemic. I would now like to ask Steph Keeble and Bas Zwiers to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Steph Keeble and I'm the director of Birmingham LGBT.
Hi, my name is Bas Zwiers and I'm a representative of Alle Kleuren Oost, which is roughly translated in all the colors of East. Yeah, we're working in the Amsterdam East area.
All right, thank you so much, Bas and Steph, for your introduction. And thank you also for being here with us today. And I think now it's time for the first presentation. So I would like to give the floor to Steph and take it away.
Just a quick introduction. My name's Steph Keeble and I'm the director of Birmingham LGBT. Birmingham LGBT is a non-profit organisation delivering services to the lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans community in Birmingham and the wider West Midlands. And we deliver a range of services, including sexual health promotion, counselling and wellbeing support, domestic abuse services, volunteering and peer mentoring support, older people services. We run a trans youth group, and we put on a range of events, including events and heritage projects, including Shout, Birmingham's Festival of Queer Culture. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today has come out of the first heritage project that Birmingham LGBT ran, which was called Gay Birmingham Remembered, which looks at the history of gay Birmingham from the 50s up to 2008 when the project finished. So that's where some of the information will come from. There is a website if people want any further information. So just to start off, a little bit of history around LGBTQ spaces in Birmingham. So pre-1967, pre-legalisation, there were no gay bars or clubs until after decriminalisation in 1967. However, researchers found that LGBTQ people often met in tolerant straight bars around the city, where they provided a source of income to landlords. And a few of these that came up in the archiving were the Kent Street Baths, which is now close, which was frequented during the 1950s, acted as a place for gay men to meet in private, away from hostility and discrimination. The Woodman, 1940 to 1964. The Woodman was an impressive Victorian bar, popular with gay men before decriminalisation. It was often raided by the police, because in these times there was often raiding in public spaces. Howard's Bar, February 1949 to February 1965, colloquially known as Robbie's after the landlady who ran it, and situated opposite Snow Hill Station. The upstairs lounge was very popular with gay men in the 50s. It was demolished in the 60s for the inner ring road development. The Imperial Hotel, 1943 to 1973, was a space frequented by upper-class gay men located on Needless Alley. In its second iteration, so it's closed and then reopened, it housed woman-only discos in the 1980s. And February 1945 to February 1970, the Temple Bar, situated on Lower Temple Street near to New Street, was a popular pub with gay men in the 50s, and W.H. Auden was known to drink there in the 1940s. So that sort of Temple Bar area of the city was where a lot of people were meeting. The Tragada, or the Troc, was originally a long, narrow bar running from Temple Street through to Bennett's Hill. Although not a gay bar in the sense we know one today, gay men were tolerated there. So this area around Temple Street was the unofficial gay village of the 50s and 60s, with the Imperial Hotel across the road and the Temple Bar down the street, popular meeting places for gay men. The Victoria as well, people might know the Victoria now, people are in the city. From 1965 was popular with gay men from the 60s until the 1980s, and that might have been due to its closeness to the Silver Slipper, which February 1905 to April 1987, the Silver Slipper was a large Victorian underground public toilet. It was Birmingham's most notorious cottage, which is Polari slang for public toilet, because pre-decriminalisation, quite often LGBTQ people also had their own language to identify each other by. And for many years, until it was closed in the late 1980s, it got its nickname from a ballet shop opposite whose sign was a large silver ballet slipper. Back in the 50s and earlier, bars were licensed only till 10 p.m. So many gay men moved on to one of a number of cafes, coffee bars or milk bars. Notable cafes included the ornate Cardamar on New Street, Altora by Collingwood Passage, and the Tow Rope on Broad Street and the Sombrero on Hulls Fair. So pre-1967, there were very few spaces where women could meet and socialise. As you've probably heard, I've talked a lot about gay men. Pre-1960s, all the bars noted as being popular with the gay crowd in the 40s and 50s seemed to have been restricted to men, and this was whether by design or default. Gay Birmingham Remembered only found one reference to gathering of lesbians in the 50s, and this was what was described as a rough Irish pub at the top of Digbeth near to Selfridges, where women quite happily met in large numbers, but that was the only reference. So post-1967 and moving into the 1970s, I'm going to look at a bit of history of how the gay village came to be where it is now. Following legalisation in 1967, several gay venues started to pop up around the city, including the Nightingale Club, which is Birmingham's oldest gay venue. It still exists, although not in its original space. It's had 4 different homes over the years. Pre-decriminalisation, as I've said before, gay people were tolerated in pubs and clubs, and the police could raid these, or the landlords decide not to serve gay clientele at any time. It was often the case that landlords allowing gay nights would overcharge customers, and there was a sense that they were being ripped off by the purely commercial operators. The Nightingale, or the Gale as it's known, is the oldest surviving gay venue in the city. There's a special place in the city's history, and we've recently, as part of another heritage project, produced a film about the history of the Nightingale, and that's on YouTube if people want to look it up in memory of its 50 years. So it was originally set up very much as a community venue as opposed to a commercial one. It was run for gay people by gay people, and during its history the club has occupied 4 different sites, and for most of that time was a private members club, requiring guests or visitors, as they were known, to be signed in by members. It's unique amongst commercial gay organisations in Birmingham in that it was set up as a club rather than a business. It was originally run by a committee elected by the club's membership, so that all members had ownership and a say as to what happened in and to their club. And throughout its history, it's housed the Switchboard and various other charities. And so it was very much a community venue at the time. So it's colourful history. The Nightingale has lived in several locations. It started at Camp Hill, moved to Aston, then Thorpe Street at the back of the Birmingham Hippodrome, before moving to its current location at Essex House in Kent Street. And I've got a picture. So there's the Nightingale, Birmingham's oldest gay venue. And as part of the heritage project I've just mentioned, we put some murals about its history on the walls. So in the early 70s, the bar scene was still mainly male dominated, made up of private members clubs that did not allow women in. Women had campaigned for access to the Nightingale in the 1960s, but weren't allowed till much later. They did eventually have women on the committee, but it took a longer period of time. In the early 1970s, Guys Limited was picketed by a group of 20 to 30 lesbians, resulting in a discussion with the management on the street and then a concession to allow women entry to a mixed night on a Tuesday. This instantly became the busiest and most successful night of the week, and the mixed Tuesday night was carried over into a successor business, the Grosvenor Hotel on Hagley Road. While initially not welcoming women, Laurie Williams later allowed women into his new bar, The Jug, which is also got quite a history in Birmingham. Luckily, he was able to smoothly change the meaning of The Jug from just us guys to just us gays. So, a little bit about the women's movement. So with the growth of the women's movement during the 70s and an interest in acquiring women-only space, a selection of women's nights were negotiated at some venues. Gradually, women started organising women-only spaces, including at the Imperial Hotel, in the Purple Room at the Greyhound Cider House, and at the Communist Party headquarters, the Star Club. The Star Club was a space specific to working class and socialist women, in comparison to the Grosvenor, which I just mentioned, which tended to attract upper class lesbian and gay crowds. Noel Gordon from Crossroads, some people may be familiar with Crossroads, often frequented the Grosvenor. So lesbians, particularly the more political section, had colonised the tiny pool room at the rear of the old Moseley Arms, affectionately known as the Old Mo, which was regularly packed from wall to wall. And women also organised various ad hoc gatherings, often as post-conference socials, famously after the Women's Liberation Conference of 1978, which was the last national Women's Liberation Conference, which happened in a school in Ladywood, and is all documented as part of the Gay Birmingham Remembered project. These often featured local women musicians and singers. So a very, very separate movement at the time. There were gay men setting up members clubs and women having separate spaces. So the growth of the gay village. The gay village currently is now is associated with the south side of the city. So the Birmingham Gay Village is an LGBT district or Gaybourhood next to the Chinese Quarter in Birmingham city centre, centred along Her Street, which hosts many LGBT-friendly businesses. In the 70s, the top end of Her Street was a focus of gay life, partly due to the move of the Nightingale to Thorpe Street near the Hippodrome, and the presence of the Windmill Bar in Albany House, and the Jester, which is underneath Scala House on Holloway Circus, serving the gay community in the vicinity. This clutch of bars was often inconspicuous and known only to the gay community themselves. So slowly over the next 15 years, gay businesses colonised the semi-derelict lower end of Her Street. It was traditionally quite a derelict area, quite a poor area, sort of inner city area where, you know, leases were quite reasonable, and surrounds. From the early pioneers such as the Fountain, which is still there, the Village Inn, which again is still there, Route 66, to the eventual move of the Nightingale from its Thorpe Street to Essex Street on Kent Street, the area seen a continual expansion of gay businesses and a recognition of the area as a gay village. And I think it's marketed as such now, as part of Birmingham's marketing strategy. Most notably in this time, in 1997, Angels, which is now Sidewalk for anybody who's familiar with Her Street and the village, opened on the corner of Her Street and Kent Street, and it was the first bar to have plate glass windows open to the street, heralding a new era of openness in the city's gay community. Prior to that, quite often bars were dark, people used to have to knock on hatches, sometimes have to identify themselves as gay to be able to access or be signed in by people they knew. Just a little note about intersectionality and LGBTQ spaces. Today in the Southside area of the city, there are 13 bars, clubs and a community centre. And shops, many with rainbow flags outside, and many LGBTQ people have moved to the new apartments in Southside, wanting a slice of vibrant city living. The scene in Southside Birmingham has become more mixed over the years, but it is still predominantly young, white and male, with only one bar catering specifically for women. And I'm sure most people who've been out know that if you're over 30, you feel quite old on the gay scene in Birmingham, so it does feel very young. A number of bars have offered specialist nights for the trans community and for BAME communities, including Urban Slag, which is now hosted in Digbeth, and Sati, which used to be hosted in DV8, and I'm saying now hosted, this is pre-pandemic, obviously we're all in lockdown and everything's currently locked. So Birmingham LGBT Centre, which is us. So Birmingham LGBT Centre opened in 2013 on the edge of the gay village next to Bar Jester. It was the third LGBT centre in the city, with the first opening in Digbeth in 1976. And the first centre that opened in Digbeth was actually the first out lesbian and gay centre in the UK. This was the first LGBT health and wellbeing centre in England and Wales. So the centre provides a range of services. The venue is accessible and it delivers a number of services, including sexual health, counselling, domestic violence services, befriending, wellbeing support. I went through them earlier. It also has, as part of an intersectional offer, it has two specialists, BAME workers, one working with South Asian men who have sex with men, and one working with African and Afro-Caribbean men who have sex with men. We also have a women's worker as part of the sexual health contract, delivering services to lesbian and bi women, and there is a trans clinic that meets as part of that offer. We have a specific trans service, which includes trans counselling, trans youth group and trans wellbeing support and events. The centre also provides free meeting space to over 20 unfunded LGBTQ community groups. And we were open until this last lockdown. We're currently all working from home, so that's us. For anybody who hasn't seen us, we're opposite Radisson Blue, about 5 minutes from the railway station, and we're on the edge of the gay village, or the Gaybourhood as it's become known. It's a very city centre. Just a quick note about Pride Festival, because this is also part of what's become known as a Gaybourhood or safe space. Birmingham hosted the first Birmingham Pride Festival in 1997 and has held the event annually since. The first event was organised by a group of businesses and community volunteers called the Birmingham Triangle Committee. Birmingham's first Pride Festival was a carnival event around the city's burgeoning gay village. Unlike the more politicised events worldwide in the 80s, this was purely about the community letting its hair down and coming together, although the fact that the festival touched the city streets at all made a powerful political statement to the wider community. Initially, there was no Pride parade. This came about in subsequent years. Today, Birmingham Pride is a large commercial festival which attracts many visitors to the city. It runs annually on the last bank holiday weekend in May. So a little bit, I was asked to think a little bit about LGBTQ spaces now and in the future. So traditionally, Gaybourhoods have formed in poor and often derelict inner city areas, helping to rejuvenate and reinvigorate the areas. In many areas of the UK, gay villages border Chinatown, i.e. Soho, Manchester and Birmingham. Currently, many of these areas are under threat. Increased gentrification of inner city areas, has seen many small LGBTQ businesses being priced out of the area and out of the market, and forced to lead into many business closures. Over half of London's LGBT venues have closed in the last few years. Birmingham has seen an increase in applications to build further residential apartments in the gay village, and there is a growing concern that this will impact on the village and result in further venues being lost. There is currently ongoing discussions around planning for the site opposite the Nightingale Club, which used to be DV8. Hasn't gone through planning yet because there's been quite a lot of challenge from the community. The community has challenged some of the planned redevelopments and are concerned that some of the venues have short leases that will not be renewed. Several venues have been lost over the last 5 years, including DV8, Queer Street, the Wellington, and more recently Eden Bar. We believe it's vitally important that we maintain the cultural diversity of the Southside area and maintain the historical gay village, which serves the centre of the annual Pride celebrations. So a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on the community then. During the pandemic and the 3 periods of lockdown, LGBTQ safe spaces have been closed. This has had a profound impact on the mental health of the community. We carried out some research commissioned by Public Health Birmingham during the first lockdown, and we found that in the biggest areas of concern for people were isolation and health worries. 40% of the people surveyed were living alone, and they would have been used to perhaps going out of work, after work, meeting their friends in the village, and this was now all shut, as with community groups, the centre, specialist events. So in the last month, 34% of the respondents lived alone and reported isolation from LGBT community and safe spaces. 70% felt that their mental health had been impacted significantly in the last month. 63% felt depressed, 77% felt anxious, and 64% lonely. Just under 14% had felt suicidal in the last month. Safe LGBTQ spaces have been needed more than ever during these times. One of the things we found, we did move all our services, well, as many as we could digitally. We did open for a while in a COVID secure way before locking down again on the 4th of January. But we found that some people can't access online support. There's a big issue, 2 issues really. One around digital exclusion and digital poverty. So for example, some people don't have access to Wi-Fi connections or data to get online. And the other one around privacy. So if you're locked down with an abusive partner or a toxic family, or you're not out to your family, it can be really difficult to access online support and entertainment. So I put a couple of quotes here. With the LGBT centre closed, I don't have access to anywhere I can be relaxed enough to be healthy. I'm even more trapped and socially cut off than before the lockdown. Don't lose the presence and community in LGBT plus quarter, as it's an outlet and support network within itself. It would be good to get the LGBT centre open again as a community venue as soon as it's safe to do so. I miss the community. I feel like I've gone back in time. I don't live in the city, but my entire social life was based in the city and included singing. So with bars, pubs, clubs, restaurants and choirs all shut, I haven't been with those who accept me for who I am for months. And there's been a big impact during this time for all businesses, and particularly LGBTQ businesses are included in this. So the pandemic and a second lockdown will be having a major impact on the hospitality sector, and LGBT businesses will be affected. One business, Eden Bar, which was a really popular venue, has already closed. They couldn't afford to sustain with the COVID restrictions in place. They couldn't get enough people in, so they had to close. And if the Pride Festival does not go ahead this year, which I think it's unlikely to personally, this will have a further impact on already struggling business venues, and others may be forced to close, resulting in a further shrinking of the gay quarter in the city at a time when people will need safe community spaces more than ever.
Okay, thank you, Steph. Now I will give the floor to Bas.
Well, thank you so much. Pete, could we start the short clip first? I will introduce it. It's part of the Pride East movie we made last year. During the pandemic, we couldn't organize our big festival. And it gives a first insight into who we are and the people we represent.
Welkom bij Pride Oost 2020. Inmiddels weer de 8e editie van onze Alle Kleuren Oost buurtfestival.
Dit keer vanwege COVID niet op het Javaplein, maar wel samen online.
Pride Oost is de afgelopen jaren uitgegroeid tot een bijzonder en betekenisvol inclusief buurtevenement.
We laten vol trots zien dat we samen Oost maken, samen Oost zijn.
Een buurt met aandacht en ruimte voor iedereen, ongeacht afkomst, gender, etniciteit, fysieke mogelijkheden, levensbeschouwing en seksuele gerichtheid.
Vol trots bieden wij een podium aan de vele talenten die Oost maken tot wat het is.
Een veelzijdige buurt met dansers, rappers, koks, kunstenaars, MC's, DJ's, zangers, dichters.
Dit jaar brengen we al deze talenten samen in een film, gemaakt door en voor de buurt.
Zo laten we zien dat we veerkrachtig zijn en dat we elkaar ook in lastige tijden weten te vinden.
Pride Oost 2020 is net als alle andere jaren een feestelijk moment waarbij verbinding in diversiteit centraal staat.
Met deze mooie creatieve talenten tonen we de veelzijdigheid, diversiteit en solidariteit in Oost.
Wij zijn samen Oost.
Wij zijn samen Oost.
Wij zijn samen Oost.
Wij zijn samen Oost.
Wij zijn samen
Oost.
Wij zijn samen Oost.
So, of course, it was in Dutch, so sorry for that for all the English speakers. But it was mainly to show our movement. Alle Kleuren Oost is a broad movement within Amsterdam East of individuals, organizations working together to celebrate our diversity. We're one of the most diverse area in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam is called one of the super diverse cities in the world. And we try to bring all the different people together in different ways on different moments. And in the movie, you could see the variety of people being part of our movement. Our movement started about 9-10 years ago when Martin Bos, an openly gay sexual man, started working in the community, and well, he was kind of annoyed by the media, because in the media there's always this polarization talking about problems with Muslim community, gay communities, and that it's always conflict. And he said, not in my neighborhoods. I'm working with Muslims, I'm welcome in the mosques, we're organizing parties together, they were organizing iftars together. So he said, we have to show that our neighborhood is more inclusive than people think. And that the way to solve these kind of problems is to come together and to celebrate, to talk, to embrace each other. And at some moments when it's more difficult, to get together and have a conflict. And yeah, see what happens then. So, but 9 years ago, it started with, like I said, an iftar with a purple edge, so to say. We started doing a neighborhood Pride festival during the big Amsterdam Pride. We started to have a small little party within our neighborhood. And we started with the World War II remembrance, which we also said, let's make it more inclusive. Let's really give a stage to all the communities, all the people they lost during World War II, to also look at the sacrifices all the communities have given, and therefore bring people together. Well, and at this moment, we're, well, mostly known, not only in Amsterdam, not only in the Netherlands, but all over Europe and maybe even further in the world, for our big Pride East event. Every year we come together on the main square of Amsterdam East, the Java Square, and we give a stage to all the talents of the neighborhood. And by doing that, you get all different communities sending in or showing their own talents. So that might be cooking, that might be organizing, that might be presenting, that might be singing, rapping, whatever, playing with the kids, doing arts. And in that way, they find a place to show themselves, to show the way they are proud of themselves as part of the Amsterdam East. And a way to celebrate this under the rainbow flag, all together, showing support to each other. And maybe this is a nice moment also to show some of the pictures, if possible, to give you an idea about how our festival looked like. So as you can see, it's, well, on the picture on the right corner, it's quite busy nowadays. I think the last edition, 2019, we had about, at the highest moment, I think 2,000 people, and it hardly fits on the square anymore. So our growth is a problem, because I'm not so sure how we are going to do that in future editions, but it will be okay. We organized it together with Trans Amsterdam. So the last edition, they had their own stage with trans artists. We have, yeah, all kinds of different people joining in. On the picture on the left below, you can see an elderly dance group performing. Maybe if we go to the next picture. Or maybe we don't go to the next picture, that's fine as well. We see that bringing the people together in celebration really works, because there's not so much of a threshold, and people just don't even sometimes realize why they are partying, but while they are partying, they see people they never see or never talk to. Like, one of my favorite moments was, I think 3 years ago, there was a Syrian refugee dance group, and they were teaching the audience the dabke. And then you saw like a white gay man dancing with a trans woman with a Muslim guy, and all together hand in hand dancing the dabka. And I think the beauty of that is that maybe a day or 2 days later, some of these people realize, hey, this was something I didn't expect to do. Or maybe if you would have been asked, well, you have to dance with a gay man, they would have said, well, I don't know if I can do that. And now it just happens. And on the festival, they also see other people like, hey, I'm not so sure how to think about this, but my this guy I know from the church is here, or this guy from my community center is here. Or so the key figures in the neighborhood are really important to also bring in their respective communities. And that's also the way we've been growing year after year after year, by every year also asking the people around us, so what would you need to be able to join our movement? What would be a topic you want to discuss? What would be a talent you want to show? What's unique about you that you want to bring to the stage? And I think that's also because we say it's about celebration, and that's true, and that's the main moments we organize. But there's also a strong activism side in our work, and in my view on it as well, is in the Netherlands, we've been using this word tolerance for decades, and it was like a holy word, and the Dutch were so proud and talking in the world how tolerant we are. But tolerance to me is one of the worst things we ever invented, because tolerance is, well, I've learned it in business school. Tolerance is, for instance, the Mars factory, where they say we have a tolerance on 0.05% fecal matters and insects going into your Mars bar and your Kit Kats. It's something we can't eradicate, so therefore we have to live with. And is that what we are telling people? I will tolerate you. I can't ignore you. So, well, okay, I'll give you a corner of the neighborhood and please stay there. No, we want to really go beyond that. So even further than inclusion, but really like, how can we come together, redesign, redefine who we are together? If this is our neighborhood together, how do we make it ours? How do we change it? Where are we going? So that's one of the main things we try to do. And what we also notice is by really building the relationships when, well, yeah, it was an expression someone used like the other day, like cast the iron when it's cold. So really come together when there aren't any problems. So the moment there is a problem, we have our community. We come together, we talk to each other, and we see how we can solve it. And that also brings me, and I'm not sure if now the pictures work. Pete, if you can try it, then, and otherwise it's okay as well.
Let's try it.
Right behind me, you can see one of the campaigns that's going on for a year now. Because we did have some incidents in Amsterdam, in our neighborhood, with violence, threats, all kinds of unpleasantness to LGBTQI couples, people. Well, this is still one of the images of the Pride Festival. So we're longing to organize it again. Not sure if we can do it in this way this year, but yeah, we can't wait to bring all these people together again. But these are also the people we want to talk to when we have problems in the neighborhood. So if we can get the next picture, see if it works. Okay. Well, you will see we started this Samen Oost campaign, which means together we are East. It was also mentioned in the movie. And it's a poster campaign in our neighborhood where we stand up against the violence, in this case against the LGBTQI people, but also recognizing it's not the only problem we have. People wearing jihad in our neighborhood are being spat upon, or the hijab is being pulled off by boys. young people can't get jobs or internships because of their surnames. We have synagogues in Amsterdam, in the east as well, that still have to be guarded by police. So we started this campaign to say, well, we have to stand up against all these kind of problems, but we have to do it as one. We have to come together and we have to show that we are connected to with each other. So all over the neighborhood, you will see these kind of posters in windows of houses, sometimes together with rainbow flags, Progress Pride flags. You can see them on mosques, you can see them in shops, on all different places, to really show that we are working on a neighborhood where we come together as one, with all our differences, with all our diversity, but that we also know that that's the beauty of our neighborhood, of our Amsterdam East. And I think for now, that's the main thing I want to share about this, and well, look forward to any questions from you all.
Yes, thank you, Bas, and also thank you, Steph. These were some really insightful and inspiring presentations. And I see that already some people have posted their questions in the Q&A box. So I'd suggest that we just start a discussion session now with the first question. So I have a question for Bas. And the question is, how can the student community support the LGBT community?
That's a great question. I think, well, first of all, to talk with them or organize something together, or become part of our Pride East group and join us. But I think, first of all, also just look within your own community, like who is there, what they do they need, and is it even safe for them to speak out within the university, within student groups, etc. Yeah, and well, I'm just thinking very practical as well. Contact organizations like COC Amsterdam or the Gay Straight Alliances. They have also programs you can implement. But I would really invite you to be part of Pride East, especially also students from the Wieboudstraat and Science Park. Yeah, love to come together and join us.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Steph. Someone asks, do gay bars nowadays serve the same function as a protected place for leisure as it did back in the 1950s?
I'd probably say they weren't a very protective place in the 1950s. There weren't actually any gay bars in the 50s. They didn't start forming until 67. There were spaces where gay people went, but they were often open to police raids because sex between two adult men was illegal. So I think in the 60s, late 60s and 70s, 80s, then they became established as safe spaces, social spaces, but also places where people can meet each other. Do they form the same function? That's a really interesting question. I think for some people they do, for other people they don't, because what we've seen in more recent years is that there is more, I don't like the term tolerance either, but there's more acceptance, and lots of LGBTQ people will be drinking in all sorts of different bars in the city centre and will be able to feel quite safe holding hands with their partners. We have also seen over the last 4 or 5 years, though, an increase in hate crime and hate incidents. Certainly following the Brexit vote, there was an increase in hate towards a number of groups. As a venue, the LGBT Centre never experienced any hate crime prior to 2015. Over the last few years, we've had malicious communication, we've had threats, we've had stickers saying "Stop AIDS" put on the centre, which we've had to get police involved with. During the last lockdown, our windows were put through twice. Once I thought maybe that's just, a bit of vandalism, but twice you feel targeted because nobody else's windows in that area area were put through. So we have seen an increase in hate and lack of support. And I think for many people, those are spaces that they feel safe in. So I think there will always be a need for gay bars. I think what it's about is it should be about choice. It should be that people could choose to drink in an establishment that was mainly LGBTQ or drink anywhere else. That's what we're aiming for, is a city where people can use all of the leisure venues, whether they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans or heterosexual. Hopefully that answered it and didn't digress too much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then I have another question for Bas. And that is, to what extent do gaybourhoods cause segregation between gay and straight communities? And would it be realistic to promote greater integration in the future?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I don't think it's about either. I think it's very important to have places where communities within themselves can come together and organize and feel safe and feel strong, whether that's LGBTQI communities or some Muslim community, Suriname community. That doesn't really matter. I think it's important to have your own spaces where you can come together, where it's safe to explore your voice in a way. But then the next challenge is to come together as a neighborhood and raise it to the next level. So I don't think, like, if I look in Amsterdam East, we don't have a real specific area which you could call a gay village. Like Amsterdam Center has certain streets with bars, which you could call the gay center. But I think in our neighborhood, what is nice to see that it is more getting more and more integrated, where you see different shops, bars, etc., scattered over the whole area. And it's also quite interesting in comparison maybe to Birmingham, where also gentrification here means more places get available for gay couples, and some shops, like one of my, where I bought my last couch, he says, well, I'm really happy with gay couples coming to the neighborhood because they have they seem to be able to spend more money and they're good for my shop. So, and I think in that way it's nice to see it integrating, but also not from a top-down perspective, but just by living together in the neighborhood, getting together, buying your coffee at the local store, buying your coffee or buying your groceries at the Muslim farmer market, whatever. So yeah, I think you need to do both.
Okay, this next question is for Steph. I was interested in what you said about the exclusion of women from men's bar in Birmingham before the 1970s. Have you found any information on whether this was related to a concession made to social attitudes to keep a safe space for gay men from discrimination? Was there anything to do with gay men having more traditional attitudes in relation to gender and or sex at the time?
Okay, I mean, I think there are a number of reasons. And it was certainly sort of late 60s and 70s. I think some of it was about gay men wanting a space where they could meet other gay men, and they were setting up clubs for themselves. I think some of it was historically lesbian and gay men tended to be in very separate spaces. So certainly in Birmingham, the Gay Liberation Front in the late 60s, early 70s was very much run by gay men, whereas the Women's Liberation Front, lots of lesbian women associated themselves with the women's movement. So some of it was around political movements. Some of it was, there was some misogyny. You know, there were men who didn't want women in their clubs, and as I gave some of the examples, women were petitioning so that they could get membership. And actually what we found certainly in the UK was that the coming together of gay men and lesbians and bisexuals and trans people really happened around the last pandemic, the HIV and AIDS pandemic in the 80s and 90s, where lots of lesbian women were on the front line supporting gay men, and lots of, so that was when the sort of scene became more integrated, if that makes sense. So I think some of it was rooted in gay men just wanting spaces for themselves. Actually, when they started to allow women's nights and they were really busy, it then made commercial sense for that to continue. So some of it was around viability of bars. But yeah, and the example I gave, Laurie Williams, who, if anybody wants to look at the sort of history of gay Birmingham, was a very colourful character on the scene. And originally it was like, he was absolutely, there were going to be no women. That's why the jog was called Just Us Guys, and then he changed his mind and it became Just Us Gays. And I think it would have reflected women's position in society in the late 60s and early 70s. It was the start of second wave feminism, the women's movement. Women had a very unequal status in society. That doesn't mean it's equal now. Women still earn 85% of men's wages, for example. But I think part of that, a lot of lesbian women saw themselves having more affinity with the women's movement than perhaps they would have with the Gay Liberation Front, for example.
All right, thank you so much. Then the next question, I think, can be answered by both. And that is, what is the most challenging part of the LGBT services now that everything is online?
Okay, so there are a number of challenges, some I alluded to. So some of our services moved online quite easily. So we can offer counselling online, we can offer face-to-face support, we can offer phone counselling, phone support. But one of the issues is not everybody can access that. So there's a privacy issue. So young people going home if they're not out. We live in a very diverse city. So some people, because of cultural or religious grounds, may be at risk if they were out to their family. 25% of our domestic violence service works with people at risk of forced marriage, honour-based violence. So that's one of the issues, is around privacy. I've also seen an issue, and I thought it was interesting when we talked about the perception of LGBTQ people having lots of money, or the pink pound, or the gay spend, which some people do, but actually we work with a lot of people who don't. We are referring people to food banks. We see refugee and asylum seekers who have no income. So we've actually got a grant to be able to give them data packages or netbooks so they can get online. So that's one of the challenges, is whether some people can access those services. There are other reasons why services might not feel accessible. So we've had feedback, for example, from some people who have autism, don't like Zoom, find it really difficult. So there's not everybody likes socialising on Zoom. So even though we've put some activities on and events on, it's not the same. Sexual health services. So we run sexual health services, even though we can post out a testing kit, we can do a Zoom call, we can do an assessment, somebody can do their own point of care test. Actually, people are much more likely to come in for a sexual health screen to the centre. So when we did open, we opened from September till January. We were only open 3 days a week, but it was really to offer services to people who couldn't access. So domestic abuse services, counselling and HIV testing. We very much hope, I'm really sorry about that, I've just turned it off. We very much hope that we are going to be able to open again quite soon. But obviously we took a view in the beginning of January when there was so much virus out there and it was spreading so quickly that we didn't want to put staff or service users at risk, because many of our service users are immune suppressed. So there are some real challenges, but we have continued to deliver services. We've changed some of our services, we've developed some new ones. So one of the things we now have is telephone befriending, which we weren't offering before. So we've trained some volunteers who can just ring somebody up and have a chat. It's not support. If somebody needs support, we'd want them to phone them into a support worker so they could be assessed and get proper support. But it's somebody who can just have a chat who's LGBTQ, because one of the things people have found is for example, even when the lockdown was lifted a bit, it's lifted now. We're in lockdown, but you can meet one person for a walk. We're not a geographical community, so most people's friends who are queer don't live opposite them. They might have to travel miles to meet them for a walk. So that's some of the challenges we faced, but we have managed to run most of our services. All of our staff are still employed. We haven't furloughed anybody. And I'm really proud that we've managed to continue through this really difficult time, because it's been a difficult time for everybody to deliver services, because it's going to be a real challenge coming out of it, I think.
Yeah, so for us, I mean, we're not so much delivering direct services to LGBTQI people, but I think the challenge we see, well, is mostly what Steph says as well. Like places are shut down, they can't go anywhere where they normally would go. I think one of the things we realized is that, for instance, the libraries have been an important safe place for young people to come together, where they can openly meet each other, where it's not possible for them to meet on the streets because their family or surroundings might have an opinion about that. So, well, that's a challenge. And for us in our work, well, our work is bringing people together. So yeah, that's a big challenge. So we try to do whatever is possible online. We did the Pride East last year as a big movie showing all the different talents, the beautiful sides of our neighborhoods. And I think the link to the full movie is also being shared to all the participants, although it's in Dutch. We didn't have time to translate it yet, but and that's also, we're still doing what we always do, like joining meetings of partner organizations, sending out our ambassadors, Jaka Coates, she's also one in the audience right now, joining in talks with them, or and maybe even more now doing the activism part. So the Samen Oost poster campaign. The last 2 weeks we've been quite busy because there was another case of violence in one of our neighborhoods. So contacting with the media, bringing the story out, bringing the community together, even organizing a small event with some people outside on the grass, and well, try to do whatever we can and find new creative ways as well. So we will start maybe diversity walks in the near future in the neighborhoods. And we're already rethinking the Pride 2020, 2021 already. Like, how are we going to do that? Because it will be a stage where we can show the diversity of this neighborhood. Even if we have COVID, even if there's lockdown, we will celebrate. So, sort of that.
Okay, we don't have enough time to answer all the rest of the questions, but Terry and I wanted to thank everyone, our audience, our panelists, or the organizers of our event for their time, and we hope this was an eye-opening experience for everyone.
Thank you all so much.